only men and women make children. Men and men don't make children. No matter what you want to think about it, whether I'm politically correct, I don't care. Men and men don't make children. Women and women don't make children. Children are our future, folks. They're our future. No children, no future. It's simple. Free sex, debauchery, lack of self-control, dangerous diseases, fatal diseases, they're all the consequence of this so-called freedom. Throughout the world right now, it is estimated there's between 5 and 10 million people carrying the AIDS virus. At the close of this century, there will be over 100 million. And this is because of the laxity of moral standards, which will continue to affect others. AIDS, as you know, it's an epidemic. It destroys your system, your body system. It leads you to an appalling death. So far, nobody has figured out a cure. They found a way to stop it, but nobody's found a way to cure it. And how does it get there? Through blood transfusion, some metal contact, some, but mainly illegal drug use through infected intravenous needles, through illicit homosexual and heterosexual relationships, spreading right around the world. It is reckoned that the number of AIDS victims doubles every 8 months. Every 8 months. The Sunday Times of London reports that Britain may lose 10,000 citizens to AIDS every year before the end of the century. In the USA, the number of AIDS victims continues to rise, no matter what they paint over it, at alarming rates. More children are born with the disease and suffer dreadfully throughout their short lives. If you've ever seen an AIDS baby or a crack baby, you know what I'm talking about. Educational authorities they hope to stem the increase. And what did they teach them? How to masturbate. Yeah, it's good for you. Learn how to masturbate, because then if you learn how to masturbate, you won't get in trouble. That's their idea of how to help the situation. This drug problem, this sex problem, is intimately connected to rampant militarism, which is infecting and affecting the third world. The arms industry is a global industry. It's a business which manufactures and sells weapons and military technology and equipment. It comprises government and commercial industry. It involves research. It involves development. It involves production. It involves the service of military material. It involves the State Department. It involves equipment. It involves facilities. These companies, these arm-producing companies, called defense companies. Defense, yes, oh yes, defense companies. These armed industries produce the weapons mainly for the armed forces of states. These departments of government also operate in the arms industry, buying and selling weapons, munitions, and military items. We see it. Ships, guns, ammunition, missiles, military aircraft, military vehicles, electronic systems, and more. The arms industry also conducts significant research and development and is corrupting day by day every higher educational institution in this country and throughout the world. It is estimated that yearly over $1.5 trillion are spent on military expenditures worldwide. 50% of which is spent by this country alone, the United States, to give it its name. Part of this goes to the procurement of military hardware and services from the military industry. The combined arms sales of the top 100 largest arms producing companies amounted to $315 billion in 2006. In 2004, $30 billion were spent in the international arms trade, a figure which excludes the domestic sales of arms, like what's going on in Mexico and so forth, and the illegal trade in small arms, which is prevalent in many regions that are affected by political instability. The latter statistic measures with the use of child slavery, with rape, as instruments of warfare, which is further fueled and further fuels the drugs and AIDS epidemic, not to mention the worldwide spread of food indeficiency and outright starvation that accompanies these so-called, quote-unquote, bush wars. Not referring to the former president, but wars that take place out in the outback of places. Think of these things. This is what Allah says, don't you see what's going on? These things paint, if you look at them, you know, a grim, grim, grim picture of the circumstances and the consequences of the materialistic life which has turned its back on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Turned its back on the message of the Prophet, or the Prophet Jesus, or the Prophet David, or the Prophet Moses, or the Prophet Ibrahim, or Musa, or Krishna, or whoever you want, any one of these world teachers. They have turned their backs on them. And all of the moral and the spiritual values that are contained in these teachings and the manifest example, which is called the Sunnah of these prophets. This terrible suffering which is afflicting the world, these diseases, these addictions, are the result of the inability of people to actually practice what we're talking about today, which is freedom. Freedom, but freedom with restraint, freedom with responsibility. And across the world, the so-called freedom that these people are preaching results in chaos, results in disorder, results in crime, results in despair, and results in death. And it results actually in the annihilation of the very freedom that these people are seeking. Young people all over the world are attracted by these outward manifestations of the freedom of the industrialized countries. They don't understand the dangerous, destructive underside of the materialistic world. They look to these regions for their ideas on clothing, on eating, on music, on social contact, forgetting what is the price of this behavior. Lured as they are by the fashionable clothing, by the standards of behavior, they absorb into their very skins, into their souls, the idea that freedom is the license to act however you want, unrestrained by any form of moral commitment, unrestrained by any responsibilities, with the result that promiscuity rages, families collapse, a whole generations of children which are in need of love and care are lost as a result of drinking, of sex that is wild, drug-taking, street crime, destroying millions of young people, north, south, east, and west, it doesn't matter. This economic freedom under the rubric of globalization is seen as a means to exploit by those cynical people, the underprivileged, by bribery, by corruption. There is a capitalist class whose sole aim is to amass wealth in the hands of a few. In the United States alone, 400 people control more wealth than 168 million people. 400 people control more wealth than 168 million people. According to the economist Janet Yellen, quote, the growth in real income is heavily concentrated at the very tip of the top, that is the top 1%. In an analysis of IRS income data that was done by the economist Emmanuel Saez at UC Berkeley and Thomas Pitke at the Paris School of Economics showed that the share of income held by the top 1% was as large in 2005 as it was in 1928. The data reveals that reported income increased by 9% in 2005, with the mean for the top 1% increasing by 14%, and for the bottom 90% of the people, their income dropped by 0.6%. And what is totally ironic, to me anyway, is that it is this bottom percentile that routinely elects the congressmen and senators who then vote to increase the tax benefits for the top 1%, while at the same time increasing the burdens on their own selves by cutting social spendings for schools, for hospitals, for roads, etc., with the result being that now the top 10% of the American population controls 71% of the wealth of this country, while in real constant dollars, which is the actual increase in income by an average worker since 1960, hey folks, you're making $1.50 more a week than you were making in 1960. Huh? $1.50 a week. That's all you're making more than you made in 1960. In real terms. The average debt of low and middle class American families is $9,827 per person, per child. For old person, young person, doesn't matter. Everybody in this country owes, of the lower and middle class people, owe $9,827. And most of these people are living paycheck to paycheck. They depend on their plastic cards, which in turn involves them in riba. And you remember what Allah says about riba, don't you? Me and my Prophet will wage war on those of you who give riba, who take riba, and account for riba. That means 90% of the people in this country. Allah is at war with them. Why do you think it is the way it is? And they do this just to cover their medical emergencies, their household expenses, all of these things. The latest credit card debt statistics in America show that American families last year collectively owe just under $1 trillion. $1 trillion to credit card companies. And freedom is just another word, as I said, for nothing left to lose, and feeling good isn't good enough for me and Bobby McGee. So this is the freedom that led George Bush to say that the whole world envies us our freedom. And this is the freedom that prevails in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And freedom, oh freedom, this is the reason to attack Iraq, because the president told the Congress, freedom is under attack. The national security strategy begins not with the discussion of global politics, the doctrine of preemptive war, but with an invocation of freedom defined as what? Political democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of religious toleration, freedom of enterprises. And the document proclaims these are the right and truth for every person in every society, and that American freedom is universally applicable, and deeply embedded in our culture is the idea that the United States indeed has this mission, as the French used to have, called the mission civilisatrice, to spread this freedom throughout the world. May Allah help us. Questions arise here. Does democracy, as defined by the New World Order, truly achieve freedom? So that mankind desires, does it raise the level of freedom? What is the kind of freedom that this democracy is going to make for nations? Where are its boundaries? Are citizens of the first world, industrialized nations, are you free? Are the lives of those who live in the other nations not free? What about Islam? Does Islam oppose the principle of freedom, or does it approve of it? Does it call for it? Why do you think they're so afraid of Islam? Ask yourself. Because Islam is saying, hey people, don't you want to be free, really free? That's what they're scared of. They flip it around the other way around. But that's what they're really afraid of. That people really understand what is freedom actually. Not what we say freedom it is, this freedom that everybody is supposedly scared of, but what is really freedom. The limited mind has defined freedom and democracy and decide what is good, what is bad according to its own desires and its own lusts. And the result is that freedom and democracy in truth is limited at some times and it's broadened at other times. Think of prohibition. One time you couldn't get a drink in America. Now you can get a drink anywhere you want. One time you couldn't check into a motel without a marriage certificate. Now you need a marriage certificate. You don't need a marriage certificate to check into. Anybody can check into a motel. These things come and they go. This means the nations who practice such systems become what really are experimental laboratories that are in a constant state of flux regarding what is allowed and what is not, what is free, what is not. In the New World Order, freedom is opposed to and conflicts with whatever is defined by evil by whom? By human legislators, which due to their limited knowledge and abilities entails the inclusion of a lot of evil in the circle of what is good and allowable, and also means that in the circle of good there's a lot of things that are evil and forbidden. And under the so-called democracy, many evil things have been made permissible based upon how freedom is defined, but are later found to be immoral, like prohibition, and oppressive, which caused them to be prohibited. Smoking. When I was a kid, everybody smoked. Used to be ads in the stores with doctors that had their white suits on, the little mirror on top of their heads, and what are those things, stereoscopes or stethoscopes hung around their necks, and this little T-zone there telling you, buy Camels.